Today's daf is daf nun, and we begin with Lo hikrivu keves baboker. Okay, then so you'll count down from the top of the Amud till the two dots, one, two, three, four, four lines at the end of the fourth line. So the Mishnah establishes that in the case where they did not bring the carbon tamid in the morning, they could still bring the carbon tamid shel ben arbayim in the afternoon. And we'll see that Rabbi Shimon is going to disagree. And according to Rabbi Shimon, we're going to have we're going to have a possibility of not being able to bring the carbon shel ben arbayim if he didn't bring the carbon of shachar. So that's going to be Rab Shimon, who says kula hoisa kreva ben arbayim. Now, so Rab Shimon in this context is quoted by the Mishnah as saying that v'kula hoisa kreva ben harbayim. And Rab Shimon wants to say the following. If, let's say, the Ketores, which was brought once in the morning and another time in the afternoon, and it totaled a mana, that was the volume of the Ketores, and they brought half a mana in the morning, half a mana in the afternoon, an event that they didn't bring the morning Ketores, which means the half a mana of the morning Ketores, then in the afternoon they'll bring a full mana, and his proof is from the halacha of chinuch mizbach hazav. Now, exactly what the word chinuch means here in this context is a gigantic controversy. Let's go with, I think it's more or less the simple, straightforward understanding, which is Rashi's, that chinuch means the first time that you use the mizbeach, that's what inaugurates the mizbeach, meaning you, okay. Oh, that was just a car. Sorry. Okay, somebody's making strange noises out of this window, but I don't think it's a siren yet. Okay. So that you cannot bring the carbon on that mizbeach, meaning the carbon that's designated for that mizbeach, until that mizbeach has chinuch, which loosely translates into English as inauguration. So we know there are two mizbachos. There's mizbeach ha'olah, which is outside the heichal in the azara, and the mizbeach hazav, which is inside the heichal. And the Ketores was brought on the mizbeach hazav, and you cannot bring a Ketores on the mizbeach hazav before chinuch. And the chinuch, the mizbeach hazav, took place in the afternoon. The opposite is true in the mizbeach hachitzoni, the mizbeach ha'olah, out in the azara. There, the inauguration took place in the morning. So therefore, if they didn't bring the Ketores in the morning, and the inauguration of the Mizbach Hazav takes place in the afternoon, then they'll bring a full mana in the afternoon because they didn't bring the half a mana of the Ketores in the morning, and it's fine and valid to bring the Ketores in the afternoon as the inauguration. So that Ketores that's brought in the afternoon will accomplish two goals. Number one, it'll be a Ketores HaKetores. Number two, it'll be inauguration, because they hadn't inaugurated the Mizbeach Hazav in the morning. They'll do that in the afternoon. And now they'll bring a full month. Why? Because a chinuch requires the full month. And therefore the Gemara clarifies what we just explained. Chinuch mandakar shmei. Why does the Mishnah bother introducing chinuch? It seems to be irrelevant to our discussion about someone who didn't bring the Ketores, whatever Kohen was responsible in that mishmar to bring the Ketores in the morning and he failed to do so, what does that have to do with chinuch? Chisui mechzer v'achitoni, we have to add a few words to clarify the Mishnah. And that is that lo hikrivu keves baboker, if we're talking about the Mizbeach HaOlah, which requires a keves in the morning for the Tamid Shel Shachar and a keves in the afternoon for the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim, lo yakrivu Ben Harbayim. If the Mizbeach had not yet undergone chinuch, and we're talking now about the Mizbeach HaChitzon in the morning, and the inauguration of the Mizbeach HaChitzon must take place in the morning, then they can't bring the Karban Tamid of Ben Arbayim because the Mizbeach has to wait till the next day to achieve its inauguration with the Tamid Shel Shachar. So let's say in a normal course of events, the Mizbeach was inaugurated who knows when, months and months or years and years ago, and on this particular day they failed to bring the Karban Tamid Shel Shachar, is then Yakrivu Ben Arbayim. They simply will go ahead and be makriv the keves of the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim. Why? Because they're two independent mitzvos, which the Rambam, by the way, in Sefer Mitzvahs counts them as two mitzvahs independently. There's the Tamid Shel Shachar, that's mitzvah A, and Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim, mitzvah B. And an event that they didn't, for whatever reason, bring the Tamid Shel Shachar on that day, the Mizbeach has already been inaugurated mizman, so they'll bring the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim in the afternoon, and that's an independent mitzvah. On that, Rabbi Shimon made his comment and his restriction, and he said, Amar Shimon, Amosai, when do we apply that principle that despite the fact that they did not bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, they will nevertheless be allowed and obligated to bring the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim? That's only Bisman Shayu Anusim, Shogigim. Maybe they didn't have a keves in the morning, or maybe they mistakenly thought they didn't have a mitzvah to bring it in the morning. They'll only have a mitzvah in the afternoon. That's a shogeg. So under all those circumstances, we'll allow him to fulfill the mitzvah of the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim as an independent mitzvah. Now we introduce what's called a knas. V'lo ekrivu keves baboker, lo ekrivu ben arbayim. The Gemara later on, as we'll soon see, is going to object. How could you tell me that just because the Kohen was negligent and he didn't bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, therefore the Mizbeach is not going to get the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim? How could you possibly assume such a thing? And that's where we'll see that the Gemara is going to change the meaning here, that the Knas is not as far as the Karban, but as far as the Kohen himself. The Kohen who in that Mishmar was responsible for bringing the Tamid Shel Shachar, and he failed to do so deliberately, and therefore he's called a Mazid, he will now lose his rights to bring the Tamid on that day, meaning the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim. Meaning there's a package deal in which a Kohen is chosen and designated for the avoda of that day that includes both the Tamid Shel Shachar and Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim. If deliberately he omitted the Tamid Shel Shachar, we're not going to allow him to bring the Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim. We'll give it to another Kohen. He's forfeited his rights. That's the knas. That's on the gaver. It's not on the Karban itself. Now we apply these rules to the case of Ketores, and we want to know whether the Mizbeach Hazov had already undergone inauguration chinuch. Lo k'tiru Ketores baboker yaktiru ben arbayim. Oh, now we're going to say the following: that with regard to the Ketores and the Mizbeach Hazov, the Mizbeach HaPnimi, there the inauguration could take place in the afternoon, as opposed to what we said in the case of the Karban of the Mizbeach HaChitzoni. So therefore, in event that they didn't bring the Ketores for whatever reason in the morning, and that was the half a mana that they had to bring of the Ketores in the morning, they'll bring the mana or the half a mana. We'll have to figure it out. That'll depend upon whether there was inauguration. But let's assume that there was never inauguration. They'll inaugurate that Mizbeach Hazov on the first hakrova, meaning the first avoda of the Ketores with a mana in the afternoon, because that's exactly when you do the chinuch. Minani mili, the Gemara wants to know, how do you derive that in the case of the Mizbeach HaChitzoni, the process of inauguration requires that you bring the Tomid Shel Shachar, and it says, V'sakeves hasheni tasa bein harbayim. And the Gemara in this brisa analyzes the extra word sheni. The Torah didn't have to add the word sheni, because we know it's the sheni. He already mentioned in the previous pasuk the Tomid Shel Shachar. So the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim is the sheni. Why do you call it the sheni? And the answer is sheni bein harbayim v'lo rishon bein harbayim. In other words, the rishon, meaning the first ola, the first tamid that's brought for the first time on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, cannot be brought bein harbayim. The first inauguration, the initiative, has to come in the boker, in the Tomid Shel Boker. This is all in a case of Shalom Nischan Mizbeach. And therefore, what are you going to do? You want to bring now the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim, and you didn't bring the Tomid Shel Boker. You can't do that. Why? Because the Mizbeach is not inaugurated. And the Torah says that the inauguration has to take place with the Tomid Shel Shachar, which he failed to bring. Aval Nischan Mizbeach, if the Mizbeach HaChitzon had its chinuch way back, then afilu rishon bein harbayim, then there's no problem if the first carbon Tomid of that particular day will be the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim, because he omitted and failed to bring the Tomid Shel Shachar on that morning. Emasai, and that's where Reb Shimon adds his restriction. That's only bisman shayu anusim oshogim aval hoyu mazidim v'lo akrivu keves baboker. If Kohen X was responsible for being negligent and not bringing the Tomid Shel Shachar, then lo yakrivu ben harbayim, we're going to introduce a knas, and we won't allow that Kohen to bring, even though he theoretically has those rights according to the Torah law, to bring the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim. And the Gemara says that lo iktiru k'toras baboki aktiru bein harbayim. In other words, in a case, as we said before in the Brisa, where there was never a chinuch on the Mizbeach Hazav, so if they didn't bring the Tomid Shel Shachar, the Ketores of Shachar, they'll bring the Ketores in Bein Harbayim, and that'll be, as we said before, two birds with one stone. It'll serve the function of the Kiyum Mitzvahs Ketores, and at the same time, it will inaugurate the Mizbeach Hazav. So now the Gemara asks the question that I mentioned earlier. I don't get Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is saying we're going to introduce a knas because they deliberately failed to bring the Tomid Shel Shachar, and therefore they can't bring the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim, which is a separate independent mitzvah. Is that be the case? Mizbeach Batel? Does the Mizbeach get robbed of the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim because of this Joe who deliberately failed to bring the carbon of Shachar? Certainly, they're going to bring the carbon Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim, but they won't allow that Kohen who is responsible and negligently failed to fulfill his responsibility to bring the Tomid Shel Shachar. He won't get a chance. He forfeits his rights to bring the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim. Now, the last part of the Brisa says, Lo iktiru k'tores baboki aktiru bein harbayim. With regard to the Ketores, in any event, if they didn't bring the Ketores in the morning, even if the Mizbeach had never experienced and undergone inauguration, nevertheless, they'll bring the Ketores of Bein Harbayim. And now the question is, well, wait a minute, where's Reb Shimon here? Reb Shimon should have stood up to the plate and again introduced the Knas and said that why didn't they bring the Ketores in the morning? There must be some Kohen who was negligent. Why not at least impose a penalty, a punishment on him, a Knas? The Kevadol Shchicha Umi Atra Chaviva Lahu Velo Pasha. Okay. The Gemara says the following. We have a rule that Bezdin doesn't make takanos in a milsa de lo shchicha. When something is rare and it only happens, in some fluky way out case, we don't have any institutions on the part of the Rabbanan. And therefore, the Gemara is going to say this situation where a Kohen deliberately failed to bring the Ketores Shel Shachar is a very rare situation. It's lo shchicha. Why? So first of all, because as opposed to all the karbanos of Ola, including the Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Ben Abayim, which are brought throughout the day, and there are frequent and manifold karbanos of Ola that are brought during the day. In the case of Ketores, there's only two during the day. That's called Lo Shchicha. But above and beyond that, the Gemara says Uma'atra. Ma'atra means, based on a pasuk in Chumash, we're going to derive the conclusion that he who does the avodah of the Ketores, which, by the way, he only does once in his lifetime, he's going to experience rich wealth. In other words, he is got the skula of wealth. And therefore, if a Kohen gets his once in a lifetime opportunity to bring the korban, to be mocked to the Ketores, and he has an opportunity to now become a wealthy man, no one would give up on that. Even though I have to add a little comment parenthetically on the side that heavy Oved es Hashem and Meshamish es Rabbo Shalom and Aslakabel Pras, but nevertheless, it's an extra motivation. Really, he's doing it l'shem mitzvah, but why not get wealthy at the same time? And therefore, lo pashi, it's going to be very rare to find a Kohen who deliberately fails to live up to his responsibility and be mocked to the Ketores. Amar Reb Shimon, v'kula hoisa kreva ben arbayim. Now, Reb Shimon says that in event that they didn't bring the Ketores in the morning, which would have been a half a mana, in the afternoon when they bring the Ketores, they have to bring a full mana. She'em mechanches be'chazav el Ketores hasamim shel ben arbayim. That the chinuch of the Mizbeach Hazav, as we said before, has to be in the afternoon. And if it's going to be a chinuch, then you need an entire mana, a full mana of Ketores to be mechanech the Mizbeach. And it could be, this is Rashi's interpretation, that Reb Shimon wants to bring a proof that in event that they didn't bring the Ketores in the morning, they'll have to bring the Ketores in the afternoon, a full mana, even if it's already been inaugurated. Of course, we're going to use the inauguration case as our archetype of a day of Ketores, which didn't have the first half in the morning, to bring the full half, the full whole, I should say, in the afternoon. Or Tanya, the Gemara says, I don't get it. You're telling me that the Mizbach Hazav requires inauguration in the afternoon? For Tanya, we have a brisa that says, Victoris Hasamim Shel Shachar, that on the contrary, we're going to be Mechanech the Mizbach Hazav with the Ketores of the morning. And the answer is Tanoihi. This is, in fact, a machlokes tanoim. And Abaye is going to explain the yesod of this machlokes tanoim. Let's just give it over outside, and then we'll see it inside. There are two ways of understanding the inauguration process of the Mizbach Hazav. And it all depends on what your standard of comparison is. If your comparison is going to be to the Tamid and the Mizbeach HaChitzoni, because we want to equate two Mizbachos, then we'll derive from the Mizbeach HaChitzoni that since that inauguration of the Mizbeach HaChitzoni is in the morning, as we derived from the pasuk earlier today, then likewise the Mizbeach HaPnimi, Mizbeach HaZav, should also have its inauguration in the morning. On the other hand, there's another possible equation and analogy, and we should make an analogy between the Ketores and the Hadlakas Neros. The Iker Hadlakas Neros in the menorah was in the afternoon, and according to many Rishonim, there was no Hadlak in the morning, there was only Hatava, in which case they cleaned out the wicks and so forth and so on to prepare the candelabra for the Hadlak in the afternoon. In any event, in the case of the menorah, the inauguration was in the afternoon. We have reason to equate Ketores with Hadlaka. We'll see that in the pasuk, and therefore the inauguration of the Mizbach Hazav should be in the afternoon. Omar Abaye, Mistaber Kamandi Omer B'Ketores Asamim Shel Ben Arbayim. We have a logical reason to equate the Ketores and the Mizbach Hazav with the Hadlaka of the menorah, but by the way, that menorah was also in the Heichal, like the Mizbach Hazav. But that's for a different reason. He says, the word yaktirena is referring to the Ketores, and the beginning of the pasuk is referring to the Neros. And even though the Hatavas HaNeros was done in the morning, but nevertheless Adlakas HaNeros was done in the afternoon. And that's exactly when the Mizbach HaZav, which is the Mizbach HaKtores, would be inaugurated. And Abai explains, Ilav Diovid Hadlaka Mi'urta. What was the Ikar Adlaka in the menorah? It had to be Bi'urta. Bi'urta means in the evening preceding the morning. Why? Hatava b'tzafra mehecha. Why would they do hatava and clean out the menorah of all its wicks and oils and so forth and so on that got schmutzed up if there was no adlaka the night before? And therefore, the adlaka is the mitzvah of adlaka is in the afternoon, and that's bein arbayim, whereas the mitzvah of hatava is in the morning. And therefore, we're going to follow suit that the same halacha of chinuch of inauguration of the Mizbach Hazav with regard to the Ketores is in the afternoon, because as we saw, the word Yaktirena is written together in the same breath with the Adlokas Haneros. Now there are Rishonim who have the opinion, the Rambam at the head of it, that there were two Adlokas. There was Adlaka in the afternoon and the Adlaka in the morning. But nevertheless, even the Rambam would agree, apparently, that the Ikar Adlaka was in the afternoon. And this would explain, if you heard what I said a little earlier today, that the Rambam counts the Karbanos of Tmidim, the daily Tamid Shel Shach, as two different mitzvahs in Taryag. But in the case of Ketores, in the case of Adlokas Neros, even though there was Adlok in the morning and in the afternoon, according to the Rambam, nevertheless, the Rambam only counts it as one mitzvah. Apparently, the Adlok in the morning is tafel, is secondary to the main primary Adlok, which is in the afternoon. The Gemara now asks the following question: Laman diyomer Ketores hasamim shel shachar. And what about this other brisa that we brought that says that the inauguration of the Mizbach HaKtorah should be dafka in the morning? Gomer Mizbech HaOla. Let's compare two Mizbachos. And just like Malahalan in the Mizbeach HaChitzoni is B'Tamid Shel Shachar, we already derived from Sukkim that the inauguration is with the morning Tamid. Afkan so too, V'Ktoras HaSamim, with regard to the Mizbeach HaZav Shel Shachar. The Mishnah says, "Lo ala shulchan el b'lechem hapanim b'Shabbos." And now we're talking about inaugurating the shulchan, and the shulchan was designated for the lechem hapanim, and the lechem hapanim was placed on the mizbeach, the new fresh lechem hapanim on Shabbos, and that's when on Shabbos the shulchan would be inaugurated. The Gemara says the following: let's be medayik in the language of the Mishnah. The language of the Mishnah is excluding the chol, the weekdays, from inauguration. El b'chol, let's be medayik that a chanuche hudlo machak. There's no chinuch that can be accomplished in the chol, in the weekdays prior to the Shabbos that on which the lechem hapanim is brought. Ha kiddushe mekadesh. It would seem to be that what the Mishnah is implying is that the kiddush of the lechem hapanim could be accomplished even during the week. The only thing that requires Shabbos is now the inauguration, the chinuch of the mizbeach, of the shulchan. So the Gemara explains, no, you got it wrong. The truth is that there's no kiddush of the lechem hapanim until Shabbos. And he gufa kamashma the chinuch for kiddush the shulchan b'Shabbos, who the Mishnah wants to tell you that both processes, the process of inaugurating, that's chinuch of the shulchan, and the process of kiddush of the lechem hapanim, both are achieved together simultaneously on Shabbos. Kediktani Seifa, and that's why we understand the final section of the Mishnah. V'los hamenorah el b'shiva neroseh ben arbaim. Okay, now Tonu Rabbanan. Zeu Ketores she'olso liyochid al mizbeach hachitza. Whoa, this is wild. The Ketores was brought by the tzibur on the mizbeach hapnimi, and now we have a brisa that tells us that there is a possibility of a Ketores that's brought by a yochid on the mizbeach hachitza. Can you imagine an individual will bring a Ktores on the Mizbeach HaChitzon? He's got two strikes against him. Number one, it's not the Mizbeach HaZav, which is Mizbeach HaKtores. Number two, he's a Yachid and not a Tzibur. But nevertheless, that only happened one time in history. For Rosh Hashanah. Hecha. What kind of Horosh Shah? There was a special ruling only for those circumstances at that moment in time that a Yachid could bring a Ktaris on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Rav Papa ben Nesiyim. We're talking about the Chanukas HaMishkan, and the Chanukas HaMishkan, the Nesiyim brought all their unique karbanos. Each Shevet had its Nasi that brought a karban, and at that point in time, the Nesiyim, each one, as an individual, as a Yachid, brought a Ktores on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. But it's a one-time deal, and it'll never be repeated. Ella, Yachid al Mizbeach HaChitzon Hudelo. Are you telling me that you've excluded the possibility of a Yachid bringing the Ktores on the Mizbeach HaChitzon? Are you implying that al Mizbeach HaPnimi Makriv? That maybe a Yachid could bring his Ktores, personal, private Ktores, on the Mizbeach HaPnimi? Visu, and furthermore, are you implying also that al Mizbeach HaChitzon Yachid lo, but HaTzibur Makriv? Are you telling me that a Tzibur could bring, voluntarily, a Ktores on the Mizbeach HaChitzon? That's impossible. But Tanya, Yachal Yehi Yachid Misnadim Mevi Yotze Ba B'Nedava. You might think that an individual, as a Yachid, could donate a carbon. And the carbon that we have in mind here is going to be the Ktores. He now has taken upon himself a haflas neder that obligates him to bring a Ktores. He accepted upon himself beneder that he'll bring a Ktores, and he'll bring it on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Talmud Lomelo Salu Olav Ktores Zora. That you cannot bring a Ktores Zora. And a Ktores Zora will mean a Ktores of a Yachid. Yachal lo yeh Yachid mevi she'ein mevi chovaso kayotzim. So maybe we're excluding the Yachid because the Yachid will never ever have the opportunity to bring a Ktores.